Okay, so we're picking up right now with the next couple of battles here that are pivotal for the shape of the war. So this one's the Battle of Fredericksburg. So after the Battle of Antietam and McClellan's hesitancy to pursue Lee across to stop him from crossing the Potomac to get back into Virginia, Lincoln replaces McClellan with General Ambrose Burnside. And you can see his picture here, and there's a distinguishing characteristic on Burnside that we actually still have a legacy of today, and that's these things on the side of his face. He was named Burnside. Today we have flipped it and we call them sideburns. So the expression of having, the hair along the side of your face, it doesn't quite form a beard, or does form a beard in his case, came from Admiral Burnside. So Burnside was local, born and raised in Indiana, not too far from us. Like many other Civil War generals, he graduated from the West Point Military Academy, where he then went on to serve in the Mexican-American War. Following his service in the war, he went on to work in gun manufacturing, and that was one of the characteristics he continued even after the war, was manufacturing weapons there. He was initially a commander of the Union forces in North Carolina before Lincoln summoned him to take over the Army of the Potomac. And in many ways, where McClellan was cautious and always thought the Confederacy had more troops and just was hesitant to attack, Burnside was the opposite. He was someone who didn't have much caution. He was emotional at times, and he was even reckless in terms of leading the troops. So the complete opposite of George McClellan. Well, we get to the Battle of Fredericksburg, and it takes place in December from the 11th to the 15th of 1862. Burnside is the commanding Union officer, and Robert E. Lee is commanding the Confederate forces. The Battle of Fredericksburg is known for these futile or useless attacks by the Union Army on December 13th against entrenched Confederate defenders on the heights of the city. So there's heights that are behind the city here, and the Union's trying to attack those defenders who are dug in and entrenched in there. It's remembered as one of the most one-sided battles of the war, with Union casualties more than twice as heavy as those suffered by the Confederates. So it was a 2-to-1 ratio of Union injuries to the Confederate injuries. A visitor to the battlefield described the battle to Lincoln as a, quote, butchery. Burnside's plan was to cross the Rappahannock River, which you can see here at Fredericksburg, in mid-November and race the Confederate capital of Richmond before Lee's army could stop him. Delays prevented Burnside from receiving the necessary pontoon bridges. So these bridges that they're attempting to build there were delays in getting the materials to him and getting the manpower to do it. So Lee was able to move his army to block the crossings. When the Union Army was finally able to build its bridges and cross under fire, direct combat within the city resulted on December 11th and 12th. Union troops prepared to assault Confederate defensive positions south of the city on a strongly fortified ridge just west of the city known as Mary's Heights. On December 13th, one of the parts of Major General William Franklin's army or forces were able to pierce the first defensive line of the Confederate Stonewall Jackson's forces to the south, but was pushed back. Burnside ordered the right and center divisions of two other generals' armies to launch multiple frontal assaults against Longstreet's position on Marney Heights, and all were pushed back with heavy losses. And on December 13th, Burnside withdrew his army, leaving another failed campaign in the Eastern Theater. So this would be considered a Confederate victory clearly at Fredericksburg. With that, Lincoln is forced to look at his commanding officer yet again. And so Burnside is relieved of his command, and General Joseph, whose nickname is Fighting Hooker, was given the command over the Army of the Potomac. So Hooker is from the north. He's born in Massachusetts. Again, like all these other Civil War generals, went to West Point, fought in the Indian Wars and the Seminole Wars before the Mexican-American Wars, and he was the commander of the Union forces in the Second Battle of Bull Run and Fredericksburg as well. So he participated in both those. He wasn't the commander of all the forces, but he acted in a leading role in those armies. Hooker didn't like Burnside's plans to assault Fredericksburg behind the city. He called them preposterous. So his corps suffered serious losses in 14 futile assaults that were ordered by Burnside over Hooker's protests. Burnside followed up this battle with the humiliating Mud March in January, and Hooker's criticism of his commander bordered on formal insubordination. So Hooker was getting to the point in time where he was almost insubordinate to his relationship with Burnside. He described Burnside as a wretch of a blundering sacrifice. Burnside had planned a wholesale purge of his subordinates, including Hooker, and drafted an order for the president's approval. He stated that Hooker was, quote, unfit to hold an important commission during a crisis like the present. But Lincoln's patience had run out, and he removed Burnside instead. During the spring of 1863, Hooker established a reputation as an outstanding administrator and restored the morale of his soldiers, which had plummeted to a new low under Burnside. Among his changes were fixes to the daily diet of his troops, camp sanitary changes. Remember, one of the big things that some of the casualties were caused by was death from disease in the camps. So Hooker improved the sanitary conditions of the camps, and he also had accountability for the quartermaster system. The quartermaster system is the supply men. So the whole fiasco over not getting the pontoon bridges, he is going to make sure that his troops have what they need to do there. He also made sure he hired and monitored company cooks, undertook several hospital reforms, and improved the leave system, the furlough system, which allowed one man per company by turn, 10 days to be able to leave the Army. So it was a rotating furlough, so they wouldn't have to necessarily be there all the time. He created the Bureau of Military Information, which was the first all-source intelligence organization employed by the U.S. military. He also implemented a corps badge as a means of identifying units during battle or in marching and to instill unit pride in the men. Other orders addressed the need to stem rising desertion, one from Lincoln combined with incoming mail review, the ability to shoot deserters and better camp picket lines, more and improved drills, stronger officer training, and for the first time combining the federal cavalry, the horse-bound troops, into a single corps. And despite this, though, Fighting Joe would set a very bad example for the conduct of generals and their staffs and subordinates. His headquarters in Falmouth, Virginia, was described by a cavalry officer as being a combination of a bar room and a brothel, so kind of a house of ill repute. He built a network of loyal political cronies that included General Butterfield for Chief of Staff and another notorious General Daniel Sickles for his command of the 3rd Corps. So Hooker is now commanding the troops at a significant battle that follows. That's the Battle of Chancellorsville. And that takes place in the spring of 1863. Hooker has 130,000 troops with an ambitious plan. He is going to send the cavalry to the enemy rear to cut off their supply lines and distract from the main attack. At that point in time, Lee's smaller army would be pinned down at Fredericksburg, and then Hooker's army could flank Lee to strike before moving on to Richmond. So that's kind of the big plan here, is he's going to move around behind Lee's army, cut them off, and pin them down and defeat them. These armies go into their attack, and on April 30th of 1863, the Battle of Chancellorsville begins. Chancellorsville is known as Lee's perfect battle because he made this risky decision to divide his army in the presence of a much larger enemy force. So Lee is facing a significant army of 130,000 men. Lee decides to split his army into two. And that splitting of the army into two actually results in a significant Confederate victory. The victory, which is a product of Lee's audacity and Hooker's timid decision-making, was tempered by heavy Confederate losses, including Lieutenant General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. So you see that here in the image. Jackson was hit actually by friendly fire. So his own troops hit him. It required his left arm to be amputated. He died of pneumonia 8 days later, a loss that Lee equal to losing his own right arm. The fiercest day of the battle and the second bloodiest day of the Civil War occurred on May 3rd as Lee launched multiple attacks against Union positions at Chancellorsville, which resulted in heavy losses on both sides and the pulling back of Hooker's main army. Okay, so we're going to stop here for today, and tomorrow we're going to go into Ulysses S. Grant and his ability to lead the army in the West and how that catapulted him to success in leading the army of the United States overall. So we'll see you then.